in Buffalo, New York, and we're housebound. Given the pandemic and the high incidence of deaths in the United States, New York State is the highest in the world for most cases. So I've been busy in trying to be of assistance. I've been asked by various medical establishments and clinicians to see if I could be of assistance to frontline folks, as well as others, parents and the like, who have to live with the aftermath of the pandemic. So as you know, one of the ways that I kept busy and are coping was I had this book that I wrote on Roadmap to Resilience. And on there were a whole variety of specific behaviors that people could engage in to cope with stress, loss, deaths, and the like. And they were divided into 6 domains of physical, interpersonal, emotional, cognitive, behavioral, and spiritual. The way the book was set up, it was sort of like a mini computer, because you can go to any one of the appendices that would enumerate a variety of activities, and it had sort of the page number next to it, where you could find out the kind of how-to features. Well, with the assistance of people who are competent in the area of computers, we've been able to transform the book into a website. So if your listeners will go to roadmaptoresilience.wordpress.com, they can download the entire book for free. So the whole notion is to see if I could be of help by giving this information away. So for those who are interested, it's in the Roadmap to Resilience, and I keep adding to it. The book Roadmaps to Resilience, in some sense, derived from my being a consultant to the National Guard for returning soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan. The National Guard had a higher incidence of PTSD than did volunteer soldiers for a variety of reasons. As part of that consultation, we did interviews with returning soldiers looking at the nature of the homecoming stress.
Could you give me a time perspective? What time are we talking about?
Well, most likely this started about 5-6 years ago, kind of thing, maybe more. At least that's when the book was put together. So we interviewed a number of returning service members to look at the nature of the homecoming stress and the nature of their adaptation in that process. And as we went through those interviews, I was able to cluster their suggestions in terms of these 6 domains: physical, interpersonal, emotional, cognitive, behavioral, and interestingly, spiritual. The major way that people in North America cope with trauma and loss, deaths, and the like is to use some form of spirituality and religion that we can comment on. In fact, if your listeners or readers are interested, they can go to the Melissa Institute website, and I have over 45 papers there on workshops I've done, and they can download those protocols about how to integrate spirituality and psychotherapy, how to address prolonged and complicated grief, and so forth. So people who are interested can, access this other material. Let me not lose the thread. So that work with the returning soldiers and my other work with trauma victims in the aftermath of 9/11 or Columbine or school shootings or the Parkland, I've been involved in a number of natural disasters, Katrina and Sandy and the like. I was able to put all of those kinds of suggestions together in this book that has received a fair amount of attention and is used in various psychiatric facilities. Now I'm at the point of actually giving the book away for free to see if the suggestions that I offer there may be useful in this time of the pandemic. Well, there are multiple definitions that are out there. At least for me, it's the ability of individuals, in spite of a variety of traumatic or victimizing experiences or events like the pandemic, to be able to meet adversities on an ongoing basis, in spite of the presses that come from those events. Some people have characterized it as the ability to bounce back. I don't like the limitation of bouncing back, because if you look at individuals who have been exposed to trauma, whether it's natural disasters or the pandemic or whether it's interpersonal violence of one form or another, one of the impressive findings is that while most people are impacted by those kinds of events, 75% of people will go on and evidence resilience and, in some instances, post traumatic growth. 25% of people get stuck. That is, they may develop post traumatic stress disorder, associated disorders. They may be stuck on hot spots or ruminating or doing things that exacerbate and interfere with their well being. So, to get back to your definition, without getting too formal in this, it's the ability to engage in resilience engendering behaviors, okay, that have positive outcomes. We should note, however, that resilience and post trauma experiences often coexist. It's not an either or proposition. And people may be resilient in one domain and not in other domains, or resilient at one time and not at other times. And you can not only have resilient individuals, you can have resilient families, and interestingly, resilient communities in how they respond. In the United States, it varies across the country, right? New York, where I'm living, had a tremendous demand on frontline staff. Not only were they overwhelmed by the number of cases and unprepared in terms of having protective equipment, there was a high incidence of frontline staff, nurses, doctors, and others, actually being victims of the coronavirus as well, some of them resulting in deaths. So when you have a chance to go to the website that I put together, there's a section there I put in called an addendum, which focuses in essentially on the coronavirus. And I have included a variety of coping strategies that doctors and nurses and others have articulated. Some of these mainly have to do with a sense of social supports, of them being having a buddy system, of them trying to find hope. Others are the degree to which they could engage in some kind of positive emotions, having a sense of commitment, sort of like a patriotism, a commitment to their act, being part of a team. So I invite you to go to that website and look at the addendum for very specific suggestions that could be offered concerning this frontline staff. Their life is complicated because not only do they have the job-related stresses, but they have the fear and uncertainty of whether they might infect their own family. So they're in some way socially isolated from their loved ones, which exacerbate the nature of the stress. You have to have great admiration, I do, for them. And if the website could be of any service to them and others, that fulfills me. While 75% of people are impacted by the trauma, it is important to understand that engaging in resilience engendering behaviors, whether these are emotion regulation or positive emotions, whether it's physical activities or routines, actually have neurobiological and psychosocial sequelae. That is, you can actually change the function of the brain as well as gene expression by engaging in these more positive psychological processes. So when people like Bessel van der Kolk and others describe that, the body keeps score, he's talking about the body keeps score of the 25%. It's important to keep in mind that the body also keeps score of the 75% who are making it.
Mm-hmm.
At least you want to make people aware that the brain's a pretty plastic organ, okay, and that most people are able to impact not only that, but it also impacts their social relationships. That's their moods and the like. Each of us, including you, are not only a Homo sapien, you are what I call a Homo naren. And what is a Homo naren? You are a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
So when a traumatic event occurs, when we look at PTSD, it's essentially a disorder of non-recovery. Most people are going to have some impact and even lasting effects, but they will get on and create a life worth living. I'm going to suggest that one of the things that distinguishes the 75% versus the 25%, this is the common that goes across each of the trauma events, whether it's military, natural disasters, and the like, is that event has occurred sometime in the past, either the immediate past or the distant past, okay, in terms of some victimization. And therefore, one of the things that you do is you draw conclusions about yourself, the world, and the future as a result of having that experience. You are a storyteller. So you tell other people as well as yourself about that event. And the nature of the way in which you tell it and its impact on your coping mechanism will, in some sense, lead to your being in the 25% group or the 75% group. So that is common across all traumatic events. So if you want to be in the 25% group, no matter what the trauma is, one of the things you have to do is you have to ruminate. Okay? You have to dwell on it.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot let it go. You have to see yourself as a victim as compared to a survivor or even a thriver. One of the things you have to do to be in the 25% group is you have to keep it a secret and not share it for others. To be in the 25% group, you have to avoid going for help. You have to try and treat yourself by some form of self-medication, either avoidance behavior, substance abuse, or engaging in high-risk distracting behaviors. So if you go to the Roadmap to Resilience book, I have written an algorithm, okay, a formula. So God forbid you and the others who are listening have something traumatic or victimizing occurring. I have enumerated exactly what you got to do to screw up your life. Now, if there's any merit to that analysis, then doing the converse, the opposite, would bolster resilience, right? So, under each of these headings, I have enumerated what the opposite is. Essentially, what these opposites are is to help people engage in non-negative thinking, of engaging them in the building blocks of resilience, like accessing social support, of reaching out, of giving to get. Okay? I mean, that's an important element that will put you in the 75% group. So what happens is significant others in your life, okay, are often giving you feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Not only the feedback that you can observe on yourself, because you may fail to notice, recognize, deny
Mm-hmm.
the transitions that you're going through. Okay, so I'm a clinician, so people come in, and either they see they have a problem, and they want help, that there's a discrepancy between the way things are and the way they would like them to be, or other people have referred them to me because they see that there's a nature of a problem. I can't be really therapeutic with anyone until I get them to see that there is a problem. I got to get them engaged. And I got to use my therapeutic alliance to accomplish that process. So, in response to your question, I think that there are a number of functional behaviors that will indicate, you have difficulty in terms of sleeping or eating, in self-management and hygiene. You may have difficulty performing various tasks as a student or as a worker or a colleague. You may lose faith in a higher power. You're going to have intense emotions of anxiety and fear. You may be preoccupied with frustration and boredom. You may experience prolonged and complicated grief or traumatic bereavement. You may have difficulty sleeping. All of these are problematic. And one of the big issues for us here in North America, and I suspect it's in your country as well, is that since people have to shelter in place, we're getting an increased incident in domestic violence. The algorithm was what are people likely to do to put them in the 25% group, okay? That was sort of what I meant by an algorithm, the formula. So the book is essentially, the website is essentially, what are the alternatives to that algorithm? Okay, so one of the things in the algorithm is for instance, not to share your feelings. We know from research that people who've been victimized and traumatized who have not shared it with anyone, okay, are more likely to develop long-range difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
So the alternative is that you need to share it. Now, it doesn't have to be with a therapist. It doesn't even have to be verbal. It may be art expressive or some other format. Okay, so that's one kind of thing. One part of the algorithm is the thinking traps that people get into that increase the likelihood of their experienced stress and exacerbate things. So one of the things that becomes interesting is how not to get into these thinking traps, how to mentalize, how to notice and catch. So for everything that's in the algorithm, the website will highlight an alternative. One of the things to be in the 25% group is to have sleep difficulties, okay, and cut back. So if you go to the website, Action 3 plan there, it gives you a whole list of ways to increase the likelihood that you could sleep. How do you handle nightmares and so forth? So the alternative to the algorithm is a derivative of potential interventions
Mm-hmm.
that people could engage in. Okay? So one of the things that becomes interesting is to be in the 25% group, you have to avoid help. Okay? The whole notion, the alternative is how do you have to give to get? How do you maintain contact by Zoom, by Facebook, by chat lines? How do you have faith in a higher power that engages you in positive coping behaviors? I'm not sure if I'm getting close to your concerns. So the algorithm is sort of the 25%, and the whole website is what are the alternatives not to engage in that kind of behavior. In North America, there's often, on the evening news, doctors who have kept diaries, visual diaries of their day in action. So for example, if you get to my addendum, there are examples of the way in which people applaud, the medical staff applaud any successful patient who has survived the treatment. There are examples of hope groups, which at the end of it, sort of like debriefing. People who have kept journals, either visual or written journals, where they can highlight the rest of the story. There is a sense of team support. That these people don't have to show up. It's not only medical staff. We get our groceries delivered. You got your mailman, you get the garbage collector, you get the orderly. I mean, so this is not just the medical staff. It is a remarkable group of people who, for a variety of reasons, are dealing with the exposure to the pandemic, and for one reason or another, making high commitments. I guess the major challenge is that we have uncertainty. We have no idea how long this is going to last. whether in the fall there will be a resurgence. We have no idea of what are the long-term economic consequences for people's economic stability, businesses, and the like. The notion of social distancing is really a serious one because social isolation, and especially loneliness is a high-risk behavior. In fact, more people die of loneliness than from smoking. So
How do you
especially
die of
among the
loneliness?
elderly. Huh?
How do you die of loneliness?
Okay, how do you die of
I
loneliness?
mean, you die of
Social isolation, absence of self-care,
Mm-hmm.
depression, the instance of suicidality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could start to think of the sequelae of that. It's not just having social support, it's the perception of social support that's really critical. So the fact that I am part of a community of others who are going through this at the same time is helpful. The fact that I am staying home and helping reduce the risk of infecting others is helpful. The degree to which I can find some good to give, go for groceries for my neighbor, donate blood, make a donation to a cause. The degree to which I can use my own sense of spirituality and religion to think that I'm in touch with a higher power, okay, it puts me in a way that I can be more resilient,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Now, how we could do that for a month, 2 months. Can we do this over the long term? I mean, that is really the key question, okay. I think that there are many lessons to be learned. One of the key lessons is the role that government has to play in preparing for future pandemics. I mean, this coronavirus will not be the end of it. This is part of mankind. So there is a need to think about how, in an equitable fashion, to provide protection to society. In the United States, like other countries, there's major inequalities in terms of social class, minority status, and the like. I hope that from this worldwide pandemic, we will come to see ourselves as one family, as a people in this planet, and that we will be able to address the inequalities. There's a big debate about Medicare for all in the
Mm-hmm.
United States, and can we afford it? Well, this pandemic indicates to me that we need to provide services for all, no matter what your socioeconomic or minority status is. And so, therefore, I think that the pandemic highlights inequalities that exist, and I hope the lesson is how we can address those inequalities in the future. A second lesson is hopefully people will be able to understand the kinds of resilience engendering behaviors that they can engage in, not only at the time of a pandemic, but at other times, so that we could come to recognize roots of violence, discrimination, and other things. I'm 80 years old, so I'd like to, the reason I gave the book away for free was I would hope that the lessons of that research and science can guide and influence public policy. And that's my hope, that from this pandemic, something good will come of it.